So we just had some news come out that Myles Garrett has requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns. And I think this is really interesting from, the Packers' perspective because their number one need in my mind is edge rusher. And when you have one of the best, if not the best, edge rusher in football requesting a trade, wanting to go somewhere to compete for a Super Bowl, I think that the Packers are a perfect landing spot. And I do think that Brian Gutekunst should be very aggressive in pursuing a Myles Garrett trade to Green Bay. And it is interesting here because the Browns GM and the Browns organization has said that they do not want to trade Myles Garrett. And it even came out after the trade news from Jeremy Fowler. He said, source on Browns' stance amid Myles Garrett trade request, nothing has changed. Team has said publicly it has no plans to trade Garrett. So it's tough to know, is this Myles Garrett trying to force his hand to get a bigger extension, which he could get sometime soon and become the highest paid edge rusher in the NFL? Or is he 100% set on not returning to Cleveland? That's something that is going to be interesting to keep an eye on, before he can actually get traded in mid-March when the new league year begins, because a trade cannot happen until that point. But if you're the Packers, the edge rusher room has been the biggest inconsistency this past season. And I think that, when you have someone of this caliber come around in this spot that the Packers are in right now, where Gutekunst has made it clear that it's really time for them to compete at a high level. And I think this is the kind of trade that really takes you over the top. The fact that the Packers have a massive need here, the fact that one of the best edge rushers in football wants to go to a team like the Packers, a competitive team, I think that this is something that Gutekunst should be willing to trade a lot to get Myles Garrett back. And I know the Packers love their draft picks. They, traded away Aaron Rodgers, traded away Devontae Adams, got a lot of draft capital, and it's awesome to be able to use first-round picks, second-round picks on these guys who you get to have on cheap contracts for a few years. But there is still that risk that they don't pan out. We've seen it with Lucas Van Ness so far in his 2 years. He has not really lived up to the expectations, I think, of a first-round pick in his 2 seasons in Green Bay. He has not been productive. And so that's the thing with first-round picks. They don't always pan out. So when you have a chance to get a guy who is going to be a very productive player on your team, there's no doubt about that. I think that you should be willing to trade multiple first-round picks. Now, who knows how much he's going to go for? It could be 2 ones. It could be more. One thing that's interesting for the Packers that I was thinking about was, it's a pretty complicated situation with Jair Alexander because of his injury history, because of, just over the time, it just seems to be complicated between him and the Packers at times, from last season. And I was wondering if maybe he could be a part of this deal because the Browns have made it clear they want to keep Myles Garrett. And maybe that's because they really want to, stay competitive and not completely go into a rebuild, getting rid of their best player. I could understand that. And so maybe the Packers could trade Jair in a 1, maybe also add in a 3 to get Myles Garrett. Because I think the Packers, we saw them, with Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon, and Javon Bullard against the Eagles. The Packers secondary played pretty solid football. Packers could then come in, draft a corner early in the draft and sort of be set there, and then also have Myles Garrett. And so maybe that's something the Browns could potentially consider. I mean, there's so many different options here. And honestly, if the Packers, I would have no problem with the Packers giving away a 2025 first-round pick and their 2026 first-round pick to get Myles Garrett. Just with where the Packers are right now, I think that they are a player like Myles Garrett away from really being a legit threat in the NFC. I thought they could have been a legit threat this past year, but clearly things did not go well in the first round of the playoffs. And if you're able to have, Myles Garrett out there with Rashawn Gary, I mean, that'll open things up a lot for Rashawn Gary. I saw some stat, I can't remember the exact thing right now, but Garrett faced a ton of double teams and still was one of the most productive pass rushers in the NFL. And so if teams had to really, key in on Myles Garrett, it just makes it so much easier for the rest of the defensive line, for Rashawn Gary, for, Devontae Wyatt, Kenny Clark, a lot of these other guys. And the Packers lots of times weren't able to get a lot of pressure with just rushing 4. They had to use a lot of simulated pressures to be able to get to the quarterback. And so I think this would drastically change what the Packers would be able to do. They'd be able to drop more guys back into coverage and really have a pass rush that would, down in, down out, be one of the better units in the NFL, because when you add Myles Garrett to that unit, you add Myles Garrett to any defensive line, automatically, I mean, your defensive line jumps up to a whole nother level. And so with the Packers wanting to compete for a Super Bowl, with Brian Gutekunst making that clear, I think that this is a time to swing big. And I think there could be some other teams. I think there will be other teams who want Myles Garrett. And maybe the Browns are willing to trade him. I mean, GMs say things all the time. You know, we're not going to trade this guy, then they trade a guy. So I don't think that the Browns are 100% not sold on trading Garrett. It could just depend on the offers they get. And I assume they will get some pretty hefty offers from other organizations. So it could become a bidding war for Garrett. And it could also depend on where he wants to go, because if he doesn't want to go somewhere, I bet that team wouldn't want to trade for him. And I feel like Green Bay, I mean, he's already been in Cleveland. It's cold up there. Maybe he wouldn't be opposed to coming to Green Bay if he thinks that he has a good chance to be competitive. So interesting news to keep, and we'll keep an eye on it for the next couple months and see sort of different updates that come out here. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys next time.